Hello, party people, and welcome to Wordhaven. It's your boy Kid. It's your boy Seth.
Hi.
We're here to talk about the tarot. So, there's something that I want to say, which is that everything I say is my own flawed experience. And you'll have to add it to whatever you know or don't know about these things. But I'm excited to talk about what I don't understand, which is the Kabbalah.
Yeah. On the other hand, I am a medical doctor, and anything I say can be taken as medical advice.
Yes. So nothing we say about the tarot should be understood as financial advice. We're here to talk about Wang. Wang's book, The Kabbalistic Tarot, a textbook of mystical philosophy, is sort of a textbook. It's sort of one of the big primers on the Kabbalah and tarot. And so you can use many decks with it. It goes through 4 decks. It goes through Crowley's deck, a Golden Dawn deck. It goes through the Tarot of Marseille, and it goes through. What am I missing? I said Crowley. Oh, it goes through the Rider-Waite. Yeah. So the Marseille is beautiful, and I could say many wonderful things about the Marseille. Here's an interesting fact, and don't tell this to any goth girls because they may crucify you, and you may enjoy it. But playing cards have a very interesting history, and it's hard to tell if you look at the history which came first, the chicken or the egg, on tarot or playing cards. But you can see the resemblance between the two, and so you can do cartomancy with cards like this. I love this because there's an idea within the tarot community that like a deck needs to speak to you, but it always speaks to you for $24.99. So that's the hidden message in that. You can look into methods for purification because I don't know them well. I'm experimenting with things like purifying things in moonlight or purifying things with prayer. And maybe Seth does some words for that. So I don't want to be too prescriptive on that because I don't know what will save you from evil. But playing cards have worked great for me. And they're especially great if you're tight on budget. So there's certain correspondences there. Spades would be spade is a sword. So swords, diamonds are coins. Hearts are cups. So you can read that as the 2 of cups. And I'm missing an element here of some kind. Clubs would be wands. Thank you. Did you have a point there, Seth?
Wand point. Yeah,
one point.
Also,
all right, so
I think the Golden Dawn also points that out too in some of their knowledge lectures. They do it playing card tarot suit equation.
Yeah, so looking into the history is very interesting. And in Meditations on the Tarot, a phenomenal book, an idea is posed that the easiest method to transmit this knowledge was vice. So they decided to put the Book of Thoth in playing cards for people.
Wow.
But I thought maybe the minor arcana would be a good place to start because if we're looking at the Kabbalah, there are many branches of Kabbalah. There's the Jewish Kabbalah translated with a K. There's the Hermetic Kabbalah translated with a Q, and there's the Christian Kabbalah translated with a C for our boy Jesus Christ. And there are many branches of it, but one common branch that's become particularly popular these days, although it has a long tradition, is the Tree of Life structure of the 10 Sephiroth. And the 10 Sephiroth would pair with the 10 numbered cards of the minor arcana or your playing cards, and they would progress from ace to 2, etc. And then they would move through 4 suits. So the way the structure of the Tree of Life is, and then I'll let Seth in here, the structure of the Tree of Life is 10 spheres. And those 10 spheres have a pattern, but then the lowest of those 10 spheres becomes the first of the next world. And there's 4 worlds stacked. And those 4 worlds have correspondences in elements, which correspond then with the 4 suits. Seth, you have 2 minutes to respond.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know where the history of, we've talked about this before, but equating the tarot cards onto the tree came from, but it's very Golden Dawn-y sort of thing to do, and because like, of course, the Tree of Life of Kabbalah has had many different shapes and forms throughout time, but the the version that's become vaguely standardized now when people see it is you can kind of looks like this one. Which, it has the 10 laid out in this particular way with the 3 columns, etc. And then as you said too, with the each tree can kind of turn into another tree at another level of the worlds or whatever. Yeah, I like that. Yeah, it's basically you split the thing into a fractal in every possible way. So every Sephiroth can have an entire tree in it. One tree can be on top of another. You could have trees within the tree like this. It's a fractal.
Yeah, and so I'll say something on that, which is Tom Berg in his book Meditations on the Tarot says either one sees correspondences or they don't. And so like I can't look at the tarot and not see the tree of life anymore. And maybe somebody else has a different system, which might not have to be interoperable with this one. But for me, they're very wed. And so we'll talk about the way to wed them or the way they are wed.
So is he talking about like 2 different kinds of people? Like there's these people and there's these people. And they don't
I think it's more I think it's more a question of what, for me, it becomes, a question of what is authentic experience. And it's not that I know something, but I see something, right? So it's not that I know that that the tree of life is the tarot and the tarot is the tree of life, because I'm just some schmuck with a YouTube channel, but I see it. And so that's going to color my experience. And if somebody else sees it and you keep telling them this, if you keep telling somebody something that they don't see, then they can't make mileage out of your correspondence necessarily, is what I think he might mean. But it also means you have the experience, or you're reading it in a book and it doesn't mean anything to you, which I was thinking about this the other night because I heard somebody saying like a theoretical understanding of spirituality is about as useful as trying to build a friendship on what your ex says about someone. Like if I never met Seth and I met Seth's ex, like I'd know something.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't really know. So we're playing in things that are very theoretical here. But I thought maybe we could do a breakdown of what these correspondences are. And I'll say one more thing about them, which is, to me, it's Occam's razor. To me, it's that the tarot, when you look at the tarot, it's so complicated. Then when you look at the tree of life, like it simplifies everything and gives it structure. And that's what I see when I see the tarot. And of course I would see that because I want to see the Kabbalah and everything. But it does simplify the system for me.
I don't think anyone has ever accused any part of Western esotericism as Occam's razor before, but that's very generous of you. I think that. To me, it kind of sounds like like the ancients doing like sacred teachings of geometry, or like ye geometers enter here, or whatever the quote is, where it's like this kind of geometry of math, not arithmetic, but geometry, which is points and lines and directions, and spatial math, basically visualized math, was taught as this kind of mental mode to get to the purer forms or spiritual expressions or something. So it makes sense then that if you had like a geometric layout, like a tree of life, that is helping you to be able to kind of make sense of and categorize the whole, give a framework to the system, or even like Dion Fortune said that the tree of life is used as a filing cabinet, right? It's the same kind of thing. It gives you an structure, I guess.
So it's a filing cabinet. You got your 10 files there. And then she also says that it's like the stops of a violinist. And that a violin is not like a piano. You have to make your stops. Wow. So that kind of explains like what we're doing here is like grossly conceptual. And one could argue that it's arbitrary.
Yeah, but I don't want to be having conversations with people who are like, well, my tree of life has 13 spheres on the left and 5 on the right.
Yeah. So this is the idea that the practice might be contrived at a certain point, but there's a difference between the contrivances that were handed to us by people with great wisdom and skill in terms of leading people towards wisdom, and the contrivances of Joe Dormroom.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. I mean, I think
So
that's also the kind
no,
of
go.
useful, I mean, how it just reminds you how every metaphor both has the capacity to obfuscate and clarify. And that's part of the thing with like esoteric and spiritual symbols like this, and the metaphor you used earlier about if you just study that, but you don't have the spiritual grasp of more of an essence of something, you can get to it's like, what'd you say? Like someone's ex telling you about them.
Yeah.
So it's you can get lost in the courtyard forever, theoretically, looking at all the symbols.
I only said that because I want people to not believe what my exes are saying about me right now.
Oh, that's appropriate.
Obscurate and clarify. Is that something you stole from the Latin?
Not on purpose.
Okay. I wasn't sure because it sounded like something Seth would have stolen from the Latin. Okay. Let's break it down now. Let's go to the break, and I want to talk about these. This graph is not that interesting. It just says ace, and then it just says the numbers exactly where you'd think they'd be. But I thought we could just run through that really, really quick.
Yeah.
Just like, what the hell are these Sephiroth? What are we talking about here?
I do think ace is a better name for the monad, though, if people just start calling it ace.
All right, so tell me about ace. Tell me about the monad, Seth.
One, there is nothing else to say than one. One, or I guess you can say other stuff about one, but it always goes back to one, right? What's Ararita abbreviate to? One is the beginning, one is his identity, and one is his permutation by one, or something like that.
Okay, great. What's Seth said?
Is that Fountain of Wisdom, I think?
Is that?
Or one of the books of contemplation. It's in one of them. I don't remember.
Okay, that's a wonderful book, by the way. The Books of Contemplation. It's wonderful, even though I haven't read it. I read that one out of it, which is the Fountain of Wisdom, which is a phenomenal book on Jewish mysticism. Two.
We're just holding up cards, and I'm saying what I think about them.
No, I want to go through just the spheres right now.
What is the sphere of
okay,
two?
so the top sphere would be ace. It would be Keter, which is crown in Hebrew. It's essentially the concept of a god as a unity. Although ideally you'd be there and you'd be beyond concept. And in some schools, Keter is Ein Sof. Ein Sof is the limitless. So typically in Kabbalah, you see the limitless is represented as beyond God. But there's older versions of the Tree of Life where Keter has no head, and Keter, or the crown, is the limitless.
Nice.
Okay, so it goes from that to the twos, which is Hokmah. Hokmah translates to wisdom. Wisdom is the nonverbal form of the Godhead in Sefer Yetzirah. How am I doing?
That's cool. That didn't know that. That makes sense. Another fun correspondence that makes me think of is, wisdom is the Greek version is Sophia, and the goddess Sophia. So some of the Gnostic myths, Sophia creates the bad world because she tried to make it without her partner, which would be maybe number one to number two.
She creates this world because she tried to make it without her partner.
Try to do it alone without the proper sexual polarity.
Okay. Well, her partner would be the threes, which is Bina.
I was thinking her partner would be the number one, but yeah, you could.
Okay. Yeah. Well, those are partnered in the when you go into the four worlds, which would be dedicated to the four court cards. Keter and Hokmah are the top world of what is it? What's the big one? The high one. Atzilut.
Yeah.
Atzilut. Although
because Keter's the tip of the yod, and then that way.
Yeah, it depends on this. So in this correspondence, Atzilut is the top three.
Oh.
but essentially, I'm just giving the basic rundown of what the minor arcana cards are.
Yep.
You know, because they're super confusing in terms of what, and maybe, you know, they revolve endless contemplation. But I guess I'm curious to hear your thoughts about them too. But like, because Bina is understanding. Bina is the verbal element of the trifold of the top three. So you have the aces, the twos, and the threes. And Bina, the threes, are the verbal element in the Sefer Yetzirah.
Yeah. I mean, I think Crowley also equated them to as thought, word, and speech for the top three, which would make sense, which is just, you know, emanating into more materiality, basically.
Okay. Yeah, there's a correspondence there with the major arcana too, because depending on which system of correspondence you use, because if the magician is one, the high priestess is two. So she has a written book, and then the empress is given her orders and whatnot.
Nice.
Yeah,
that's cool.
So we could look. You could spend an infinite amount of time on all these, but as the Sefer Yetzirah says, you flash on the Sephiroth because your brain can't think about them. So, nice. With that said, 4 is Chesed, which is love. Am I saying that right?
Yeah, I've seen a mercy sometimes.
Okay. Well, 4 is on the pillar of mercy, but yeah, 4 in the courts is love. Sometimes it's sort of.
It's the same root as like the Hasidim, right?
Yes, that's true. That's true. Yeah, the Hasidic movement was a movement, ideally, and still is, as it's practiced correctly, of love.
There you go.
Yeah. So the 5s are Gevura, which is strength. Okay, oftentimes kind of intimidating when it shows up in a tarot reading.
Yeah. Some other names of it too are like justice or fear.
And that pillar is the pillar of justice. And then fear. Oh, the pillar of severity. Yeah. And fear. That's fascinating. Okay, Tiferet. This is the 6s. Tiferet means beauty. It's sort of a harmonizing quality. Would you say anything else about Tiferet? Okay. I'm just walking down the whole list right now. 8 is Netzach. 7 is Netzach. Netzach is weird, and I don't get it because Netzach is victory or eternity. And then, but when it shows up in a reading, it's like kind of anything but victory. It's kind of like maybe, but there's a lot of toil and struggle and strife when you see a 7 in a reading.
Oh, interesting. I didn't know that.
I mean, that's how I see it.
There's the Rider-Waite one is like the guy with the swords running like this, right? Like running.
Yeah. And the meme of it is the Rider-Waite 7 of swords.
Yeah.
And it's like when you're drunk and you're like, fuck yeah, I'll buy all these swords. And then the meme cuts to the 9 of swords, and you're like, why the fuck did I buy all these swords?
So good.
So we'll get to the 9 in a second here. 8 would be Hod. Hod is logic, reason. So Netzach is more of the feelings. That's the 7s.
And the name Hod means splendor?
The name Hod, I believe, means splendor or translated to glory sometimes. I can't remember if that's a translation or a different meaning, because some of them have several names, yeah. Yeah, so that's right. Sorry, I skipped that. Hod would be splendor or glory. Yesod is foundation, that's the 9. Foundation is sort of in some spreads, I've seen it as persona.
Nice. Awesome.
It has a lot of meanings of will and imagination, and often sexuality as well.
Yeah. And I believe the the word for element, or like elements, like the four elements in Hebrew, is yesodot. So it's like plural of foundation.
Wait, can you say that again?
I believe the way you say elements in Hebrew is yesodot. So it's yesod, the yesods, the foundation,
Oh,
something like that.
okay. I see. And then the word that translates to foundation. Oh no, is yeah, you're right. I'm sorry, because yesod is foundation. Yeah. And then the tens are Malkut, which is kingdom, translates to kingdom. It's sort of what we think of as our physical world.
Yeah.
Will come into question momentarily. Okay, so now you know everything there is to know about the Kabbalah. Go play, have fun. Yeah, as I mean, I should flash on them more, as it's suggested in the Sefer Yetzirah.
Flash on them?
Yeah, Sefer Yetzirah says you cannot contemplate the Sephiroth.
You got flash on them?
You flash on them. You just kind of show them what you got. Well, hopefully it's the reverse. Hopefully they're showing you what they got. I don't know. What's that?
They're flashing on you.
Yeah, they should be. I mean, maybe that doesn't mean you don't you can't meditate them for longer terms, meditate on them for longer times.
Yeah.
But the revelations are like, because us, some of the Sephiroth are non-conceptual, so you're not gonna get a lot of mileage that way.
Mm-hmm.
But as these relate to readings, those correspondences, it's like some of them for me they fit and they don't fit. Like the Netzach. I mean, Netzach is feelings often, and so that'd be the sevens in readings. But victory isn't always what I see. If I get a seven of pentacles or seven of swords or something.
Yep. Yeah, it's a tricky one. Yeah. But I mean, I guess I don't know. This might be totally not related, but at least in the Hermetic framework, the planets are assigned to the Sephirot also, and seven is where Venus is, and Venus is very much like it can be really great, or it can totally seduce you into total moronic stupidity.
Yeah, which is maybe why Mr. Wang flashing on us over here, it says that you might need other cards to clarify that. Or he says that five will mean some kind of strife and conflict, but they might necessarily mean that that the thing won't work out. They just mean that there will be some conflict. And then there's also like, it's not all interoperable, right? Because if like you're using like a tarot deck that has a really lovely looking, seven of pentacles, and you have a reading of it that has a really lovely seven of pentacles, and like Kid is watching you guys and being like, no, that means everything's gonna go wrong. Like,
yeah, interesting. Yeah, I've definitely talked to you before about how I've seen like some people have relations with divination systems like tarot or whatever, what have you, where they don't follow the rules at all, but they still are very good at it, and they just get like it speaks to them correctly most of the time. I've watched some complete. I'm like, they're like explaining how they go through it. And I'm like, that's not what that means. Like, where did you get that? Why are you going left to right? But the result is correct. And I'm like, that was crazy. That's what is happening.
Yeah, well, it really calls into question that we think there is like one method of these readings.
Yeah. There's what is her name? Bernadette Brady, maybe, this astrologer who wrote a book that she uses a metaphor for this. The book I think is called The Eagle and the Lark. And I guess this pairing of birds is a phrase in like, I don't know, it's England or someplace where I don't live, so I've never heard of this metaphor before. But basically, she's saying one of them symbolizes craft or knowing the rules, and the other one symbolizes intuition. And everybody's always like, "Oh, it's all about intuition," or "Oh, it's all about being rigorous." And she's like, "Well, I mean, once you rigorously learn the rules, then you can really your intuition can be unbounded and aided by that, but it's both parts together."
Yeah, I have some confusions about this. So there's a story of Liu Ming, who was a great practitioner of traditional Chinese medicine. Um, and Ming tells a story about someone that he knew, and people would say, "Oh, doctor, you're so intuitive,"
Hmm.
and he'd say, "Oh, no, 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 Chinese." And Ming at one point thought maybe he doesn't know the word, and so he translated it for him, intuitive. So no, Chinese. And I think Ming's point was, yeah, when you learn the system, it reads like intuition,
Right.
but because the system knows something,
Yeah,
and
interesting.
so maybe somebody else has a natural skill for the tarot. Um, I've had to follow a system, and
Yeah.
that's also why like Crowley's correspondences have been so helpful to me, and like that's how I read the minor arcana and how I read playing cards to do what
Mm.
they call cartomancy. Is I've learned the correspondences that are named by Crowley, and maybe they come from other places too, but they've simplified it a lot for me, because if I'm looking at a reading that like looks at a card like seven of coins, and it could be failure, but it could be like the it could be's like are too they're just too confusing for me when I'm already reading 10 cards.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's great. That totally makes sense. But I can't do large card spreads because my brain just falls off. So like anything that kind of chops it down is help. Like that's why the I Ching is so cool, right? The I Ching is just like, no, let me explain this to you. Bang, bang, bang. You're like, whoa, what? It's very wrathful, maybe.
Yeah, it is wrathful, but it's also one of the only systems that's very literal.
Mm.
Like the if you go to get a tarot reading, the tarot reader could be very literal. They could be like, "It's not going to work." My buddy did a spread one time, um, and this guy was in this. This was in California. Harry Katz was doing divinations for donations,
Okay.
and he pulls out the ace of hearts. He's got playing cards, so he's got like the ace of hearts and a sword, um, or it was the ace of swords maybe, and he's about to do the reading, and the guy goes, "Oh, never mind. Guy's name is Ace. He's about to stab me in the back. Good looking out." And then he leaves. That was
That
it. Um,
fucking rules.
yeah. So what were you on? Yeah, the system can simplify, and then that's what um our man we used to correspond with a fair bit on the tarot used to say was like you have to know the system well enough until you can know that it's where it's incorrect or where it doesn't follow. But the arguments of sages are endless, is how this is put by Ursula K. Le Guin.
Wow, nice.
Arguments of mages are endless. Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, there's also, I think, something to be said about like a skilled reader who can read a complex amount of symbols, and then when they deliver it to the client or the subject of the reading, they translate it in a way that can be very literal or direct. You know, like anytime I've ever tried to do an astrology reading, and I'm sure you've heard me do this, I'm like, all right, cool. So here's these symbols. They can mean bang, 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 or bang. But then there's astrologers I've done too who are very good. Like read the whole chart and they'll just look at you and be like directly like, in 4 weeks, you're probably gonna move. It's gonna suck. But then this is gonna happen. You're like, how did like they're so open-ended in the symbols, and then people who can.
Yeah, and I don't have an intuition about what's going to happen, and because none of this is financial advice, um I wouldn't not that comfortable reading that way anyway, because it's funny, people will say like, "Oh, you're such a good reader," and um it's like, that's great. You should tell me that 6 months from now, if you didn't say like, I got your reading and then I bought Bitcoin or something, like we don't know how good of a reader I am until you
Nice.
go. But there is the things I get from doing a reading. So when I do readings, I get a lot from the person. And I've heard someone say like, well, how do you differentiate the person from what you're reading? It's like, you don't, why would you have to, unless you're trying to do a controlled experiment. But every controlled experiment I've looked at, anything that I'm interested in has ruined it and told me that it doesn't exist. But I'll say something about this. I was talking to our friend Tina the other day, and we were joking about something called Jewish medicine, which was, I think, from an article about acupuncture, because in Jewish medicine, like you have Chinese medicine, you have Jewish medicine. Jewish medicine is like talk therapy is Jewish medicine. So you're talking it out. And so, but that's wasn't really known in these cultures, because she was saying like, if you were an acupuncturist, like you wouldn't need to say like, oh, I'm feeling a lot of heartache. Like they'd look at your tongue and then they'd put needles in you, and then you don't have to tell them.
Yeah.
Tarot reading, I find, is more like there's this dialogue going on between me and the person in the cards also. So like some people will be really closeted about what they're going through. And so it's hard to tell when I'm, because if they're a patient, they're going, and then there are people like that. And when somebody's resisting a reading, it's great, because they're questioning things. And you're like, well, it's really clear, and then you can see where it's sore and where it hurts and where. So like when people have, you've been there when Ben Shields was like, what are you talking about? And I'm like, cool, there's some fuel to the fire now, And so what's hard is when the readings are like, they're really testing you. They're making sure you know things mystically, and so they're not going to give you any evidence.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, cool. Then I can tell you the basic symbolism, but I don't know if we're talking about your dog or the stock market.
Yeah. Yeah, I know what you mean. It's yeah, I mean, I've noticed the same thing in astrology, for example, which I know better than tarot. It's you can see say you see like, oh man, Mars is gonna square your sun or something, which is like generally it's a pretty rough symbol, So you're like, okay, what's this mean? And if you're talking and the person gives you something like, oh, that basically fits this part of my life where this happened, and you're like, oh, that fits. Then when you're looking at the chart further on, you see other relations to Mars hitting the sun, you can refer back to that event, because now you have an on the ground context as to what it means. But if you don't get any of that, if there's not that dialogue happening, it's extremely abstract. And
and I don't know how much of that is people wanting to test the reader, because
there's a lot of that, but
they don't know, and also it's not. It's many things at the same time for this person, because it's not like they're just in to get a reading. They're also, can I trust this person?
Yep.
And do I believe this thing exists?
Yep.
And it's almost like it'd be nice to separate those out, right? Come watch me do a bunch of readings and then get a reading from me, so that you can feel like you're ready to participate in it. And my same buddy Harry Katz would always end the reading with, but they're just cards. Or sometimes I'll say like, I'll do the prayer that I do to shuffle correctly. But then I'll say, these are cards, these are pieces of cardboard that I randomly shuffle, because it should be based on whether or not you're getting something from this, not based on your faith in. I'd say.
Yeah, that's good. I mean, there's so many inner dramas that people can bring to the table with what they do with the information.
Well, and that is a lot of what I think I'm reading too, because as I watch myself, there's like the areas that are just swimming in my life, and the areas that I have a lot of resistance. And so not unsurprisingly, I have a lot of resistance to hearing the reading that says, you're getting in your own way. So I'm like, well, maybe 4 more readings will do the trick,
Yeah.
But so, that's probably something you see too. Like if somebody's coming to you and they really want something to go a certain way, but you're seeing those signs, and you can hear the intensity of that longing and the querent.
Yeah. 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 I mean, I remember I learned this once too, and I got basically a geomancy reading in the Yoruban style from this guy that's very good at it. And I went there with my friend, and the way this method works, at least in the culture of this guy does the readings, is like there's all these clients sitting on chairs in the same room. So there's no privacy. It's like people like right there hearing your you're reading while they're like on their phone or they're just sitting or they're doing whatever. So my friend was sitting behind me who was getting one also. And the guy's giving me a reading and he keeps saying things like, here's this symbol, I see this, here's this, I see this, here's this, I see this. And I was like, uh-huh, uh-huh. And I was just very passively going, yep. And then my friend behind me just like interrupts. He's like, look, man, like this is supposed to be a conversation. You need to contribute when he's saying things. And I was like, oh, okay, sure. Well, I don't relate to that. And that makes sense, you know? And it really changed the tenor of the information we were getting.
I think that's really true. Like, because because those who are neither hot nor cold, I will spew you from my mouth.
Right.
Somehow Seth and I talked about Revelations without talking about that line.
Yeah.
Which is a deep fail. But yeah, it's like you need, because that's where the participation is. So the my friend Adam McKeffey has an album out called Let's Kick Fire, and there's a line on it: if you love me, you'll fight me on this.
Okay.
It's like, yeah, that bit of participation is really important, because that's where you're coming up against something. So the part where the querent argues is really rich.
Yeah, interesting. I'd never thought about that, but yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah. You can't always go there, because there's reading. I guess what I'm saying is that for me, like, reading the person and reading the cards are not two separate things.
Mm-hmm.
Because of the holographic nature of phenomena, which is why readings can work maybe in the first place. But yeah, as and then there's a skill in how you communicate these things to the querent. And there's also the fact that these, like, they umbrella into so many different ways of it being, that, you know, I try to follow the Hodorowski method of, you don't read the future, you read the person. But part of that is because it saves my ass from the karmic and legal repercussions of telling people when to buy Ethereum.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
So do you do specific prayers or practices of purification and or preparation for divination?
I don't do a lot of divination.
No.
So, but I can do, when I do, it's either like pretty informal, like hanging out with people and with friends, like, oh, let's look at this. What do you see? Bap, bap, bap. In which case I don't do anything. But if I do anything on my own, it's usually pretty ritualistic, and I do prayers beforehand.
Yeah. I've started to do, I would just do reading. And then I started to get all hippie and do my actual putting my cards under the moon for the day before and after and during the full moon, and
yeah, wow, nice.
Purifying my decks. And then I do well, published in the Mo Tibetan divination system, they have some preparatory prayers for practices, and I don't know if people need empowerment for these prayers, but they have the mantra of Manjushri, Om Arapachana Di. And they have some other preparatory prayers that they do before doing Mo.
That makes sense. Yeah, the Tibetan friend that I used to have, that I talked to you about before. I remember when her family would do Mo, it would be like a really big, or they would go get a Mo done. It was like they would only do it a few times in their life, really. It was a really big deal. And when you take it, it's a really important thing that you then maybe direct certain life decisions after or something. And I always contrast that in my head with like the very flippant nature of most Western esotericists who are just like, all right, divination, bang, all right, cool, whatever. I forgot about it already. Let's do another one. Oh, I don't like that one. Now I'm gonna do a sixth one. Okay, cool, whatever. So like if you're praying or even ritualizing the scenario, you might be taking it a little bit more. You might be going a little bit deeper on it.
Yeah, so there's an expression that cobbler's feet are never shod, which is fun to say. But it means, like, you know, like when I cleaned houses with our friend Nate, my room was a mess. Still is. but it's like because you're going to do that for work, so it's almost like the opposite of that is like, you know, like there are these healthcare professionals who can't stop and have lunch and they're living off coffee. Like that's pretty normal. The cobbler's feet are never shod.
Yeah.
But then there's this other problem, which is like those in esoterica can be like getting high off our own supply because I have I don't have to, I have tarot decks so close, so I don't have to go to a car to get a reading, you know? And that is getting high off my own supply, you know, where people who see tarot readers but don't do readings have a bit more reverence for them.
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, to me, that phrase also, I mean, it kind of reminds me of like what a big issue I think with a lot of this stuff for people is that they have all these dramas about like trying to be a good reader, like you said, or like trying to possess magical power or be a strong magician or like whatever. And it becomes this weird identity thing where people are trying to achieve something instead of retaining what I think should be the natural reverence for any magical practice from the beginning to the end, no matter how good at it you are, where it's like, this is an absolute miraculous mystery that you're taking part in, you know, and it's not for you to just hold, really.
Yeah. Yeah, it's hard to know what to say after that, except so Louis C.K. was interviewed one time and they're like, so you're still working on your comedy? He's like, yeah, what am I, like a diamond of hilariousness? Like there's nothing to do here.
That's weird. It's weird to ask him that. That's like,
this is when he was at the height of his fame.
although, you know, I was on the subway just the other day, and I don't know if you're gonna be able to see this on the camera, but I don't know if this is real, but apparently Ghostface Killa has his own coffee company now, and they're stickering subway stations with it. So when your musical career plateaus, you know, there's always something else you can do.
Yeah, when I bring up Louis C.K. and then you say, I was on the subway the other day, and I don't know if you can see this.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe we've exhausted our revelations. I struggle with, I mean, thought. Bila was talking to me the other day about thought and how unhelpful it is. It has its places, but yeah, the self-directed, right? Where do I stand? Is run into probably in the reader in terms of, yeah, how far am I along and how special am I and how great am I? Or the reverse of it, which is the same thing, which is how shitty am I and am I the worst reader and am I, you know, and I have those fears. Some of them are the karmic concerns, right? Which is because I'm linking my karma with the person I'm reading for, you know. And so that's why I'm pretty careful to say, you know, to not say go break up with them or go marry them, because then I said it. And then those questions show up in the querent too, because they just want their thing to go the way they want it to go.
Yep.
Which is pretty normal. But the mysteries are an invitation towards mystery, is kind of what you're suggesting. And if we're missing that element, we're not actually doing anything unconventional with our minds.
Yes, that's such a good way to say it. Absolutely. You're just moving stuff around, moving appearances around.
Yeah. Rearranging the furniture on the Titanic.
Exactly. That's exactly right. That's exactly
right.
And I even like a lot of time I question like the utility of doing divination, because one, I'm not that good at it, so it's easy for me to be like, oh, what's the point? But because like a lot of the time, you know, like in the ancient world, a lot of the rationales that we see written for why people would do stuff like this is that it's like stoicism, like it aids you. So when you know that bad shit is coming, you have some foresight and you can deal with it with wisdom, you know. But like so much of the time, that's not what we're doing, because we're trying to accomplish a thing, and it's either going to confirm or deny it, and then you're going to kind of like wrestle or ignore or believe, you know. And it's like I continue to engage with this stuff because I just love what it is. But I'm always like, why are we doing this?
Yeah. So I'm thinking of a few things here, and I'm kind of lost in the middle of them. Because I'm thinking about my friend Anne, who says like there are some people who might be getting a lot out of their tarot and stuff, but what she sees is like all her friends going neurotic on it,
Sure.
you know. And I'm certainly guilty of that because I have a neurotic bent, so I'm neurotic with everything I do and touch. Um, but but so um the idea came up in our tarot group the other day on Meditations on the Tarot, this podcast group, of that should put no other gods before Yahweh. So Yahweh is a way of being able to say the four letters of the divine name Yod and He and Vav and He. Which, speaking of reverence and distance, I mean, the Jews won't even say the letters together. They will say Yod and He and Vav and He.
Yeah.
So so to put no, so those four letters can be stacked in an image of a man. Um, and those letters correspond to these four worlds of the Kabbalah. And so they can correspond to the four suits of tarot. You can look up the attributes for these, but basically it's the letters Yod and the letters He and Vav and He, and those form a vertical standing image of a man, and they correspond to. So the first letter would be the first two Sephiroth. The third is the second is the third Sephiroth. The third letter is the six in the middle, and then the bottom letter is the Makut. Okay, so this was interesting. The idea that you should put no other gods before Yahweh made me think, oh, you know, what I've been guilty of is putting one aspect of life in front of the others, right? Because this is kind of what we talked about in the last episode we did, is like you kind of mentioned like you're never really thinking about something other than the divinity, but you don't know that, you know, like you can't really distance yourself from God,
Yeah.
but it can really feel like it, you know. And so so you know, if the tarot exists because the world is holographic of the four worlds of divinity, you know, then all I'm doing is I'm concentrating on one aspect. I'm concentrating on money, or I'm concentrating on sex, or I'm concentrating on my feelings or relationships, and all that's showing up in the tarot. But there's this fixation, and so fixation is the problem, and that's kind of, I guess I'm seeing that now in tarot readings as like, you know, oftentimes there's something going wrong, and they want to know that this thing is going to go right, and they won't, you know, there's 10 cards on the table or whatever, like something's going right, but it's not the area that we want to focus on.
Yeah.
You know, and this exists in the Chinese system I'm learning about, in that you have, in the Chinese system, you have nine palaces. So you might be concentrated on the palace of relationships, or the palace of wealth, or the palace of fame. It's like you got all this rest of your life, but you don't care.
Yeah. It's like a little incarnation, you know, it's like you suddenly just exist as a dream character in this tiny game, forgetting the greater context of all the freedom and wondrousness that you actually possess and are.
Yeah, so I think that part of what the divination is supposed to do, although I've had a lot of resistance to it, and I think as I purify that, it'll hopefully, if I purify it, it'll probably be good for the querent too, because as I'm the querent, like the part of the point of the divination is to contextualize the area of fixation in the rest of somebody's life, but that's not normally what we want. The querent wants, how is my life going to correspond to this fixation?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. Inversion.
Yeah. And so divination doesn't exist typically alone, right? It's part of these larger contexts of healing.
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah.
And so it's diagnostic, but it's not curative.
Yeah, that's good.
and you know, like Meditations on the Tower goes over like practical ideas from the arcana. Like I'll often see a reading and be like, oh well, it looks like you should make that call. So maybe I am prescriptive there. Or it'll be like, well, it looks like your music is going really well, and you can focus on how much you love it rather than how famous you're gonna be. Like whatever it is, it's like there's so it can be diagnostic and it can be prescriptive, but it's not curative.
Yeah, that's great. Right. That's very well said.
Excellent. Okay. So now you're all certified in kids tax evasion therapy.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Seth. Seth, you can find on Paralysis or Death. But don't sext him. Because as Camille Paglia points out, hardcore sexting has become the replacement for a good old bar dive.
Nice. I'm glad we have academic theorists to tell us these things.
Where would we be without them? Okay, go forth and sin no more.
Good night.